Hi. Those of you who've been watching my channel for a while are probably already aware that I sometimes like to explore phenomena that we usually see in terms of black and white in order to discover their more subtle gradations of color and texture. Basically, that's the focus of my so-called Reconsidered series of videos, in which I previously explored things like dilettantism, loneliness, madness, nihilism, stupidity, and jealousy. I'll put some links to those in the description of this video. Anyhow, in this installment of that series, I'd like to explore the topic of nonsense, which I suspect for most people has a primarily negative valence and connotation. But as usual, it's probably a good idea to get a handle on what the word nonsense actually denotes first. Here are a couple definitions from Webster's. First, language, conduct, or an idea that is absurd or contrary to good sense. Also, things of no importance or value. And so in this video, I'd like to explore the importance and value of something whose definition states that it has no importance or value. Anyhow, Webster's also lists quite a few synonyms for nonsense. Among the more colorful ones are balderdash, baloney, claptrap, codswallop, crapola, fiddle-faddle, falderall, hogwash, hokum, malarkey, poppycock, tommyrot, and twaddle. Webster's also lists the word bull as a synonym, and so it's a little surprising that they omit the fuller term bullshit, especially since bullshit seems like a far more commonly used synonym for nonsense than, say, codswallop. I think that the last person to use codswallop in a sentence might have been Charles Dickens. So let's focus on bullshit for a minute rather than codswallop. The question is, what is bullshit? Well, in its crudest and most literal sense, bullshit is the shit that comes out of a bull. In other words, something of no importance or value, as Webster's puts it. But think about it. Is bullshit, even in its most literal sense, really without value? After all, without bullshit, well, without bullshit, there'd be no bulls in the world, because bulls that can't produce shit probably aren't going to survive very long. And without bulls, there'd be no cows, because you need bulls to breed cows in the first place. And without cows, well, without cows, there'd be no milk to pour on your damn Lucky Charms in the morning, would there? You see, without bullshit, the quality of our lives would be drastically reduced. It turns out that bullshit, the thing that supposedly has no importance or value, is actually essential to the overall value of everyday existence as we know it. Alright, okay, I guess I'm joking a little bit, but I'm doing it for a few reasons. First, and perhaps most importantly, I like to have fun in life. And I happen to think that it's perfectly okay to do that even when we're earnestly trying to understand things. In fact, I'd say that a lot of the time we actually understand things best while we're laughing and having fun. Second, I'm trying to suggest that contrary to Webster's definition, perhaps nonsense actually does contribute in various tricky ways to things that we really do recognize as important and valuable, in much the same way that it turns out that bullshit ends up contributing to the overall quality of our everyday lives. And third, I'm joking in order to introduce the idea that the domain of humor is exactly one such place where nonsense is both extremely important and valuable. Of course, it's pretty obvious that not all humor is nonsensical. But by the same token, some of it definitely is, especially from a phenomenological perspective. That is, in terms of how we subjectively experience nonsense and humor. The old Monty Python shows immediately come to mind, for instance. But to illustrate that point in a more personal way, I'd like to share another joke with you, or more accurately, my experience of another joke. And the joke I'm about to tell you is definitely one of the funniest one-line jokes I heard during my 3 years of running stand-up comedy shows. Unfortunately, at the time, I was the only person in a room of about 60 people who thought it was funny, so I can't promise you that you'll think it's a good joke. But that's not the point. The point is to tune into what you're actually experiencing when I tell this joke to you, because you might actually experience a moment or two of the sensation of nonsense, which will hopefully give you a personal reference point for our discussion about nonsense and humor. Anyhow, here's the joke. So, I went to a party last weekend. Yeah, it was an 80s party. So, I dressed up as a Roman centurion. Okay, so when the guy at the comedy show told that joke, the entire room fell dead silent, except for me. But the thing was that I was convulsing with laughter so hard and so loudly that I was pretty much out of control, which is a really weird thing when you're doing it in an otherwise dead silent room with 60 other people in it. Well, it definitely took me a while to understand that weird experience, but what happened was that that joke swung me so hard and so fast from WTF to OMG that I ended up pretty much making a complete ass of myself in public. In other words, for some reason, that joke transported me really, really fast from the sensation of nonsense to the experience of making sense, which is actually how a lot of humor works. At first, it seems like nonsense, and we feel a little bit disoriented. But then we get the joke, and it's that dizzying contrast effect that makes it seem so funny. But the point is that without that brief sensation of nonsense, as well as the moment of relief through sense-making, that style of humor doesn't work. And speaking of relief, if you're still wondering about that joke, well, see, the guy thought that the 80s party was going to be about the decade of 80 AD, or I guess maybe 80 BC, not the 1980s, and that's why he dressed up as a Roman centurion. However, nonsense is also important to humor in another way. That's because a lot of humor, a lot of funny things lie beyond, as Webster's puts it, good sense. In other words, beyond what we commonly regard as appropriate, inoffensive, and politically correct. Of course, some humor obviously plays out easily within those confines, but the point is that a lot of humor doesn't. A lot of stand-up comedy, for instance, has to do with the parts of life that lie far beyond everyone's good sense. It plays with all of the inappropriate thoughts and feelings we wish we didn't have, but the fact is that we do. And in the process, it invites us to be a little bit more honest with ourselves than we might otherwise be. From the perspective of that kind of humor, good sense still has value, of course, but so does what lies beyond it. That's because inappropriate humor possesses the power to draw us beyond what's already been tried, tested, and coded as acceptable, beyond the confines of the usual and the habitual, and ultimately toward the outer horizon of our experience, where we might be able to transform how we see the world. And that's also why a lot of great comedians are often quasi-shamanic characters who are extremely fluent in the language of nonsense, in what lies beyond the pale of what we usually deem sensible. And they also realize that there's nothing to be afraid of about that kind of nonsense, because to them, it's nothing more than the gateway we must all pass through in order to open ourselves to the greater intelligibility of life. And anyhow, the fact is that what we think of as good sense can very easily become nothing more than a totalitarian prison for our minds, and ultimately our souls. Just a linguistic place marker and one-size-fits-all justification for someone's misguided attempt to control our consciousness and behavior by coding his personal ideology as something that's automatically just plain good sense. But the deeper reality is that our souls are always much deeper and much more than any of that codswallop, and much more beautiful than any sort of good sense orthodoxy. However, the motif of nonsense also finds expression and value in another area of life that's very much related to humor: the domain of play and playfulness. Basically, in the ludic dimension of life. And here, perhaps it's best to hearken back back through the veiled mists of time to those halcyon days of our childhood. Sure, sometimes we used to play in ways that were very sensible and goal-directed, like when we'd play board games or organized sports. But a lot of the time our play was pretty unfettered and nonsensical, wasn't it? But did that mean that those moments were valueless as a consequence? Personally, I'd say not at all. In fact, from my own 58-year-old perspective, I'd say that learning to experience unbridled joy for no damn good reason is actually one of life's deepest and most important lessons. That's because experiencing that kind of joy is ultimately a lesson in the art of allowing. It's about allowing our joy to happen, and about allowing our greater happiness to happen too, and ultimately about allowing life to happen through us, rather than always trying to impose our will on whatever the situation at hand is. In that regard, nonsense and nonsensical play is actually about deepening our experience of human existence, especially by inviting us to lay claim to the wider and wilder horizon of human possibility. But beyond all of that, playing nonsensically can help break us free of the whole ponderous habit of being deadly serious about everything all the time, which, much like good sense, can itself become a prison and nothing more than a constrictive, self-imposed, and unnecessary limitation on our lives. Of course, sometimes life actually is calling for us to be serious and sensible. That's certainly true. But often it's calling for us to be the exact opposite of that. Playful, carefree, and filled with the spirit of an abiding and utterly insouciant risibility. And wisdom is about first being able to perceive when life is actually calling for that, and then being able to respond to life's call faithfully and harmoniously. But the thing is that that's not likely to happen if we can't see past the blinders of our rigid self-seriousness, at least for a moment or two. In other words, if we never learn to honor and appreciate the nonsensical side of life, we'll never become genuinely wise. Sure, we can limp through our lives without wisdom, always worshiping exclusively at the temple of what everyone agrees is good common sense. But is that really the point? Is that really enough to fill our hearts and our spirits? Seriously? Or maybe not seriously? And yeah, the hard realities of adult life can obviously make it pretty easy to get lost in the complex labyrinth of all of our serious obligations and duties. And as a consequence, it can sometimes be quite a daunting challenge to recapture the magic of nonsensical play in our adult lives. But on the other hand, do we really want our lives to be completely consumed by all of that seriousness and sense-making without ever tasting the sweet, intoxicating nectar of deep, untrammeled play and carefree nonsense? Well, I suppose that the possible answers to that question are as varied as we ourselves are. But my own answer is that I've now reached the point in life where all of my seriousness is becoming playful, and all of my playfulness is becoming serious. And I find that I'm consequently no longer content with something as trivial as being taken seriously, damn it! And at the same time, I find that I'm gradually learning to savor nonsense, to appreciate it like a fine, exquisitely wrought piece of music, infinite in its subtlety and complexity. But, of course, that's just me, and your own experience may be very different from mine. I think that there's room in life for that. Anyhow, in addition to the spheres of humor and play, I'd also like to suggest that creativity is another area of life where nonsense is important and valuable. In essence, creativity has to do with, well, our capacity to create. That is, with our ability to deviate from already established norms and bring something new, unexpected, and innovative into the world. But here again, it's important for us to be able first to slip the bonds of what's already been deemed sensible, and then to navigate the trackless sea of new possibilities. Of course, it's probably inevitable that a lot of that sort of activity is going to look like utter nonsense to people who've decided to remain safe on the shoreline. For example, Einstein's theories were once pretty much thought to be complete gibberish. That is, until they started to gain confirmation through empirical observations. And Van Gogh's paintings were also thought to be nonsensical garbage, until the art world eventually caught up with him, unfortunately after his death. Anyhow, the point is that creative activity frequently requires us to pass beyond the outer perimeter of the good sense that normally constrains everyone's behavior and thinking. And when you think about how many incredibly valuable facets of our world spring from the courage of those few creative souls in the areas of the sciences, technology, and the arts, well, it very quickly becomes more or less obvious that without our ability to entertain what at first seems like utter nonsense, there's no progress or improvement in our world. Okay, well, I guess it's about time to end this video, and so I'd like to leave you all of you wonderful viewers in YouTube land, with a final exhortation of sorts, which would be not to forget that the way we habitually think of the world and ourselves is often fraught with all sorts of limiting beliefs, and a lot of the time those limiting beliefs seem like plain good sense. And to remember that life in all of her boundless complexity and majesty is in reality far more subtle, far more intricate, and far more beautiful than anything we can possibly imagine. And that the same exact thing holds true for our souls themselves, as we participate with every breath in the ceaseless unfolding of the grand design of things. And so I exhort all of us, perhaps myself most of all, to remember to orient ourselves toward life's infinite possibilities every now and then, and toward the stars filling the vast and incalculable sky of this world. And if some of that begins to look like nonsense, well, perhaps life is made all that much richer and all that much better as a consequence. Because, after all, what are all of our sensible ideas about how life should be, or how it has to be, if not something for us to move past eventually? Past everything that would keep us neatly contained and confined, past the outermost horizon of our good common sense, and into the brilliant, fiery dawn of our greater human destinies. Just a thought. Anyway, thanks as always for watching, and as always, take care of your soul. Codswallop.